Hello and welcome to It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi. Joining me today is Jennifer Hunt, who is Vice President of Research for the Real Estate Investment Network. Thanks for joining us today, Jennifer.
Well, thank you. As always, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Mario, and I love talking about real estate, so it should be great.
So do I. So let's talk about COVID and the impact it has had so far over the last few months on the Calgary real estate market.
Certainly. Well, as we know, I'm going to actually step back a little bit. So the Real Estate Investment Network has been around 29 years, and we've been really doing a lot of research and education and providing solutions for individuals. And as such, we really focus on a lot of research, and ahead of that, we actually started tracking the coronavirus back in December 2019. Our first report about it came out in January and February. And while some of the details have obviously changed, the long-term implications of the coronavirus on Canadian real estate is that those conclusions remain sound. Now, since then, we've really looked at what is happening let's say just exactly in the Calgary market. We've seen an incredibly reduced, in a very, very short amount of time, the GDP, the economic health, as well as a deterioration of jobs very, very quickly. The coronavirus has been the number one market influencer affecting our time in our lifetimes, likely. Knock on wood. Let's hope. Yeah. And as a result, so what we've seen is Calgary has been in this very, very slow recovery when it comes to property prices and to the rental market as well. Very slow recovery since 2016, 2017. And we were expecting sort of another 2 to 3 years of this slow recovery, these really green shoots. And now with this economic hit, Calgary is actually the second worst GDP for this month in Canada. Or Alberta, I should say, generally, and Calgary is really struggling as well. So as a result, it's being hit even more so. And what we know and what we look to at the Real Estate Investment Network is what we call our economic turmoil formula. And that's where we look at these economic health factors, the drivers, the economic fundamentals, and those influence the rental market and the property market, well, about 2 years later. And so we're seeing that starting now. Calgary has entered the slump. It entered the slump at the beginning of May.
Okay. Now, obviously, the spring is the heaviest time of the year for the real estate market, residential real estate market. We kind of missed that, obviously.
All my activity then.
Yeah. So, do you think it's like gone, that kind of that period of time where that activity is so big, right, in the market? Is that completely gone, or do you think that the demand may be spread out into the year going forward?
Yeah, I definitely feel that the demand is being spread out. It was pent up, and where there is still that demand, there will be a little bit coming in. And that's one of the components that I feel is so important, because many people are hearing even all sorts of different markets that it's a hot market and what's going on, and things are still moving. And there's a number of reasons for that. And one of them is that it is actually, we expect that behavior at the beginning of a slump, because it's coming off of, and I know it's hard to feel that this was a boom in Calgary, but relatively speaking, it will have felt a bit like a boom. That soft recovery was still at a peak, and it got to a bit of a peak, and now it's moved really, really quickly through the boom and into the slump. And so we expect buying behavior to be I wouldn't go frothy necessarily in this market at all, but certainly a little bit higher. And we're seeing that demand has, since the initial effects of the pandemic have sort of slowed down a little bit, less impact. GDP is starting to come up just a little bit, jobs are a little bit more stable. Those folks who were ready to buy are wanting to get into the market for sure. So we are seeing that move. That said, again, we always look at the housing market as a lagging indicator. So in several months from now, we won't be seeing the same results.
Okay. What about the rental market? Where is it at in Calgary right now?
Yeah, well, the rental market it's a bit of a balance at the moment. We're starting to see in multifamily apartment buildings are really starting to get a lot of traction for buying. So that's interesting. And part of that is that rental market is staying pretty stable because, and there's another reason, you might think that the rental market would decrease immediately, which it will be impacted eventually. But there are so many other factors that have affected demand and supply during the pandemic. For example, emotionally, people haven't been wanting to move. So if they're not moving, they're not changing their rent, they're not changing where they're going. Additional demand factors is that we haven't had the same immigration. So there's less demand. There's less students, of course, domestic and international students have been staying home and not going to school. So that's been really reducing demand. We've also seen supply come up in terms of some of the construction projects that were well in hand. Now the absorption rates are certainly down in Calgary. So we're seeing, okay, so if we have lower supply and, lower demand, and higher supply, then we obviously are seeing a different kind of rent indication there. In other words, we got low demand, high supply, and rents are gonna go down. But there's been some other little nuances, and so that will eventually come out and play out in the market. There's some other nuances about the pandemic that are showing up, and those are things like individuals who have, unfortunately, the divorce rate is on the rise. So individuals are starting to, potentially a normal thing to do during that is that, someone will stay in the family home and then the other partner moves out and they typically rent. So that's increased demand. We've also seen a really big trend, and this was in a trend before the pandemic, but the pandemic has now accelerated it. And this is multi-generational living and co-living. So people who were in isolation or quarantine or stuck in these circumstances where, and Rain's always said, avoid those 400 square foot apartments because we need to have at least 2 bedrooms are the best for that extra space because they're also the more the robust during economic downturns. And here we are experiencing that. So individuals are moving out of their 1 bedrooms and into 2 bedrooms with roommates, seeing that across the board, and then multi-generational and co-living. So what's going to happen is the type of property is also going to be impacted in terms of where people are living and even where they're living in the city, moving out of the urban centers.
Okay, so if you're an investor, a real estate investor, whether you are looking at making money on the properties that you buy yourself, like for yourself, or whether you're looking at buying properties and renting them, is this a good time to buy?
I love that question. And it really depends. I know, everybody hates that answer, but it really depends. There's, so based on the research, we are showing that Calgary and most cities across Canada, with the exception of Ottawa, essentially, are in the beginning of slump. And typically at the beginning of the slump, it's a little bit trickier, or you might want to even avoid buying, because the best time to buy for a long-term buy and hold is at the bottom of the market. And we haven't hit that bottom of the market yet. Now that said, for a first-time home buyer or for an investor who's looking for a long-term buy and hold and they've got cash flow on a property, you can always find a property that will work for you. So as long as you've got the capital reserves and you've got the financing and you've got the stamina as well to know that you'll probably see a little bit of depreciation. But if you've got a deal that works for you now, one of our great mottos and one of our RAIN members always says, don't wait to invest in real estate. Invest in real estate and wait. So get into that market, but be very cautious about it. Get educated, know exactly what you're in for.
Okay, super. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Jennifer.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Mario.
Okay, that was Jennifer Hunt, who is Vice President of Research for the Real Estate Investment Network. This has been It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi. Please take a look at us on YouTube, the Megapix Media channel, and subscribe there. Thanks for joining us today.